or yeah, exactly. This meeting will be recorded, so this would be the time now for you to press that recording button. So thank you so much for joining us and being with us here today. As I mentioned, this is about the upcoming global climate strikes, the upcoming UN climate conference, and also I'm Luisa from Germany, so we will also mention the German upcoming election in this press conference. And with this, I would say we will start, and I'm very happy to hand over the word to Gabriel now.
Thank you so much, Luisa. My name is Gabriel Clarsen. I'm a 23-year-old socio-environmental justice activist from Gatesville, Cape Town, South Africa. I've grown up on the Cape Flats, which is a historically disadvantaged area that people of color were displaced to during apartheid. I represent the African Climate Alliance, and I've developed a few talking points that I'd like to share. In essence, as a youth-led organization, grassroots organization, African Climate Alliance, and a number of allied groups are delivering 7 demands to the South African government on the day of the global climate action. And those are including the demand for a 1.5 degree compatible NDC target for COP26, for Parliament in South Africa to create a joint standing committee of climate and ecological crisis, to consider the adoption of a climate justice charter to our constitution for accessible, and my keyword is accessible, climate literacy and adaptation to be included into our national education curriculum, as well as commitment to eliminating all fossil fuel electricity production by the year of 2035 at the very least, as well as the transformation of our Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy, which is in essence the core of our mobilization, specifically in South Africa, calling to transform the DMRE, as I'll use for going forward, for the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy, and asking them to, in essence, asking them to realize that they have been stumbling, or they are the biggest stumbling blocks toward our future that is defined by climate and social justice. And that we need them to, in essence, either step out of the way or adopt progressive change going forward to a just future and mining kind of transition to renewables and alternatives. Every year, more than 2,200 South Africans die from air pollution caused by burning coal and this investment in fossil fuels. Worldwide, more than 7 million people die every year because of air pollution caused by fossil fuels. And this doesn't even take into account those that may not die but are terribly affected. And South Africa, as you know, as you may not know, is one of the strongest impacted countries. Yet we are one of the higher emitters on the continent itself. I think we are the highest emitter on the continent, with the biggest investment in coal, of 90% being to our energy industry. We have more than 43% youth unemployment rate in South Africa and missing the opportunity to create new jobs, about more than 155,000 renewable energy jobs and other climate-related jobs as we move forward and could adapt into things. And that is why, in line with our demand calling this Fridays for Future, this global climate strike, we are calling for the phase out of fossil fuel electricity. We are also directing challenges to our government's decision to procure new coal-fired power capacity, and have delivered a letter of demand from our attorneys, which will also be handed on the day of the protest. They are instituting they will be instituting legal proceedings on our behalf in the event of our government's continuation in pursuit of developing of new coal. We hope that this shows how serious South Africa is taking this divestment of fossil fuels, so to speak. So in essence, African Climate Alliance is a youth-led organization, and we are calling for dynamic we are calling for climate and social justice, and the way that we believe going through that is through dynamic Afrocentric education and action. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words, Gabriel. Next, I would love to pass on the mic to Greta.
Yeah, hello, my name is Greta Thunberg. I am a climate activist based in Stockholm in Sweden, and I'm a part of the Fridays for Future movement as we are here today. And yeah, on Friday, the 24th of September, we are going to have our next big global strike. And it has been a very, very strange year and a half with this pandemic. But of course, the climate crisis has not disappeared. It's the opposite, is even more urgent now than it was before. And we will go back on the streets now. Of course, it will look different. In some countries, we will be more people. In some countries like Sweden, we will have smaller symbolic actions, but we will still be back on the streets to show that we have not disappeared and we are still demanding climate action and climate justice. And for this strike, our hashtag is uproot the system, which symbolizes the fact that this climate crisis is not a solitary crisis. It is not. It does not exist in a vacuum. The climate crisis is caused by the same thing that is also fueling other crises and inequality around the world and the ecological crisis. And we cannot just solve one of these crises without also addressing the others. And that's why we are striking now to call for uproot the system. And we are focusing extra on intersectionality and giving voice to the most affected people in the most affected areas. And some might think that we are moving in the right way right now, but it is actually the opposite. After the pandemic, only 2% of government spendings have been allocated to clean energy. 2021 is currently projected to experience the second highest rise in emissions ever. And a recent report by the UN says that right now it is projected that by 2030, our emissions will have risen by 16% compared to 2010 levels. And time and time again, the leaders today show that they do not care about the future. At least it doesn't seem like it. Their actions don't reflect it. They say that they listen to us young people, but they are obviously not. They have proven that now again. And that's why we will be back on the streets. And we hope that as many as possible, in, of course, taking into account the local circumstances when it comes to COVID, but we hope that people will now go back on the streets and that we will be calling for climate action because we have not disappeared.
Thank you so much, Greta. And next, I would like to call upon Vanessa, please.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Nakate, and I'm a climate justice activist from Kampala in Uganda, a country that has one of the fastest changing climates in the world. And historically, we've seen that the entire continent of Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions. And yet Africans are already suffering some of the most brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis. We've seen many Africans lose their lives and countless more have lost their homes, their farms, and their businesses. The droughts, the floods, and the disasters in general, they have left nothing behind for the people, nothing except for pain, agony, suffering, starvation, and death. So this is why we will be striking on the 24th of September to demand for climate justice. We've been speaking up in this period. We've been doing everything we can to remind the leaders and demand for what rightfully belongs to us. But it's also important to note that this Friday, we rise up again for the people and for the planet, because the climate crisis wasn't put to rest. The climate crisis continued even during the pandemic. Even right now, we've seen many disasters unfold across the world. We've seen communities that are least responsible for the climate crisis, people in Madagascar suffering with extreme famine. We've seen many countries suffer with extreme floods in this period because of the climate crisis. So this is why we will rise up and speak up and demand for what rightfully belongs to us. And for the coming COP26, we expect that leaders are going to give talks, speeches, and sweet nothings. But what we really want is that if leaders are talking about halving emissions, it should not include continuous destruction of the environment. Talking about net zero doesn't mean opening up new coal power plants or constructing new oil pipelines, like the East Africa crude oil pipeline that is going to be constructed from Uganda to Tanzania. So I'm really looking forward to the climate strike with fellow climate activists with the Fridays for Future movement, because we are ready to uproot the system.
Thank you a lot, Vanessa. I would just kindly would like to remind you to mute yourselves when you're not speaking. And with that, I would love to pass on the word to Dohyeon.
Thanks, Luisa. My name is Dohyeon Kim. I am 17 years old and I represent Youth for Climate Action Korea today. This year, Korea became the 14th country in the world to legislate a carbon neutral target. Our president also launched a presidential committee on carbon neutrality where government officials and members from the private sector to collaborate to come up with a net zero plan. And on the surface, it seems like South Korean government is working hard to tackle climate change ahead of COP. But I tell you that these efforts are completely greenwashed. In reality, in our industries, the government's net zero plan relies on technologies that doesn't even exist today at scale. But in the process, those who are on the front lines of climate change have been left underrepresented.
You might have to turn your video off, because I think let's quickly see if we can turn a video.
Would thrive on a healthy planet. Time is running out, so who's being naive here? Us young people or those in power? Until recently, a member from our organization was part of the aforementioned presidential committee. But the committee has continuously tokenized young people and has failed to come up with a concrete net zero plan. And in the process, we've realized that it's simply not enough to have a seat at the table, that we need to flip the table. So we have now officially withdrawn from the committee, and instead, we're aiming to build an alternative system that is both inclusive and democratic. So on September 24th, Youth for Climate Action Korea is launching a climate assembly powered by the people for the people. Our assembly will amplify the voices of those who are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. And ordinary citizens just like me will get together to push our government to submit a more realistic NDC that'll guarantee our survival on this planet. Right now, politicians of Korea are talking about cutting emissions by 35% by 2030. And they seem to think that this is a radical number, but it's nothing but timid and shameful. We need to do our fair share considering our historical responsibility and economic capability. And that means that we must cut emissions at least 70% by 2030. And yes, this is beyond the 50% target that we usually talk about, because equity and justice must be at the heart of climate action if we really want Paris Agreement to work on a global scale. And now is an extremely important moment. We have less than 2 months to go until COP26 election next March. And the result of this election will obviously dictate the climate policies of my country for the next 5 years. So currently we have double tasks at hand. And starting from September 24th, Youth for Climate Action Korea will call the current government for stronger climate plans until the very end of its term. And we won't let the next president reverse this trend. So please join us in this fight, and we need more support and solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will finish the section of statements with some other closing remarks. My name is Luisa Neubauer. I'm a climate justice activist from Germany, based in Berlin. And in Germany, as well as in, as you heard, many other parts of the world, we are rising again for the 8th global climate strike. Across Germany, we have more than 400 climate strikes being planned. And this is for us a very special climate strike, given that the election, the general election, is just happening 2 days later. And as we heard before, as outlined before, we strike in solidarity with everyone, and especially with the most affected in the most affected places across the globe. And we know that climate justice is happening, or includes and must include always the highest emitting countries in the world, those with the most responsibility historically and in terms of emission, to pay their debts and to rise up to their responsibility. And this means for true global justice, we need German coal power plants to be shut down. We need oil pipelines and gas pipelines to be built back, and we need to get to net zero, a real zero actually, sooner than currently planned. Not in the speed and velocity we like, but in the velocity that's necessary in order to stay below 1.5 and to contribute our fair share to that. So we are in Germany, we are organizing those climate strikes across all generations. We are, of course, using the hashtag Uproot the System, as well as Alle fürs Klima, meaning everyone for the climate, very much emphasizing that there is a majority in Germany that wants radical and rapid climate action, that is up for it, and that right now no political party is living up to what is needed in order to stay below 1.5 degrees. So for that, we are organizing very broadly, as said, in hundreds of towns and cities across the country. And we are both sending a very strong signal to the population of this country, who's going to vote and who is responsible to vote as ecological as possible, while knowing that none of the parties has a plan that is just enough, which means the change is going to come, but it's going to come for the streets. And we will make sure that this is that this message will be out there on the 24th all over the country, especially in solidarity with the most affected people across the globe, who we are fighting for and whose not only future but presence have to be protected. So much from that. And of course, I think that was outlined again as well multiple times by now. We're also looking forward to the UN Climate Conference in November, where for now we are seeing a very weak and unfair process when it comes to who is included and who is able to come. But we're also seeing a lot of empty words and empty promises from governments who are not living up to what they've promised 6 years ago in Paris. So of course, the strikes across the world, as well as in Germany, are also looking at that, demanding the end of empty promises and the beginning of real action, which is more needed than ever. As Greta pointed out, time is running, emissions are higher than ever. And we are seeing that while everyone is happy with wishy-washy promises, no one is ready for what is needed on the ground. And we're not looking away. And for the 8th time globally, we're saying, hello, we are there. We're demanding real climate justice, and we're not going away and letting you go with all the climate destruction planned. So much from my side. Now we have time for questions. You can address questions. You can just type the questions in the chat. You can address them at each 5 of us, but I think we're also free to answer what feels appropriate. I think for some of what has been cut off, I think you were well understood, Dohyeon, but feel free if to make some of your points again in the upcoming section. But I think on the bottom line, I think it was very clear what your message was. Yes, so we will start with a question in the chat from, I think, where we are at the beginning. So there was one question in the chat about the plans in Berlin. I think that's very straightforward. In Berlin, we will expect a lot of people. We will be in front of the Bundestag we will have international guests. Greta is coming to Berlin as well. And we are very, very much, pointing out that Germany needs to get up, and they need to get their stuff together here, because as well as many other places across the world, emissions have been rising this year more than ever in the past 30 years. This is a huge political failure. There is no sufficient plan of any kind of party on the table that people can vote on September 26th. Yet all the parties have promised to do their best to stay below 1.5. So they, of course, have to close this gap, and we are fighting for that before the elections and after the elections. Yes, the next question coming up is from Daisy Dunn from The Independent in the UK. Do we have a message for the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, given his role in leading COP26 in just a few weeks? Yeah, everyone just feel free to answer that if you would like. Does anyone, Gabriel, I know. Does anyone here have a message for Boris Johnson? Okay, that doesn't look like that. We will continue to the next question if we can make up our minds about that. I think Vanessa has a message. Okay.
Yeah, I think my message would be to, if he talks about ambition, then he should come behind and and do what activists who are working to stop Cambo are asking. So that would be my message, to stop Cambo in the UK.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has message for him? Okay. We'll leave it to that for now. Then the next question was if we were attending the COP in person. Would you quickly like to say something to that? Everyone? Gabriel.
I personally will not be attending COP because until a few weeks ago, I didn't know if I was able to receive the vaccine due to the inequity that the vaccine was distributed among the different countries. Even if I did get the vaccine earlier in the year, I might still not have attended because oftentimes youth are tokenized in ways that are abusive and counterproductive. But that's all I've got to add, is that I will not be attending, but I think it's a lot to say about who will be present and who won't be present due to inaction and delay in prepare.
Okay, I think we can also make the points about the COP in further answers for now. There is a next question. I think that's very interesting.
Hi, this is Leslie Hook from the FT. I'd like to ask for each of you, also for Vanessa, Luisa, Greta, and Dohyeon. Are you attending?
If it's okay to go first. Okay, I'll not be attending the COP in person, but the activists from the organization I'm part of will probably focus more on pushing our national government while we're still residing in South Korea. So yeah, no, I'll not be attending the COP in person.
Okay. And Vanessa and Greta, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I hope to attend the COP. That's what I can say. And also, I just wanted to come in on my message to Boris Johnson to make clear what the Stop Cambo campaign is. For those who may not know it, this is our campaign to stop the UK government from drilling new oil from the North Sea just off the coast of Shetland. And this oil field it's waiting approval from the Prime Minister. So that is why my message would be that he doesn't support the ongoing of this oil field.
Okay. Greta?
There are still very much uncertainties about who will go and who will not go, so I can't say anything for sure right now.
And I am planning to go unless things mean that people who are planning to come right now, to join right now, especially from the most affected areas across the globe, won't be able to attend. Then of course that will be that will change things a lot. Yes, I think we have now two questions. I think that's very interesting. The first one is for Vanessa and Gabriel. The question is, we know that leaders of the richest countries are failing, but what do you think of the action of the governments in your countries? Do they want to protect the climate and environment, or are they bent on signing contracts with foreign companies, selling of resources, etc.? Yes, this is for Vanessa and Gabriel. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I can come in to speak for my government. When leaders talk about climate, their emphasis is on planting millions of trees and different tree campaigns, which is very important, but it doesn't make sense if an oil pipeline is going to be constructed from Uganda to Tanzania. So from my own government, I don't think that they are very serious about the climate, because if they were, then we wouldn't be campaigning to stop the East Africa crude oil pipeline.
And from the South African context, I would add that my government, despite the creation of the Presidential Climate Change Committee, there is not much action behind the words. We've seen it, and that's why on the 24th and on the 22nd and the week to come, we are calling to uproot the DMRE and uproot the system, because I think if our governments were taking action, and specifically South African government was taking action, we wouldn't necessarily need to be calling for this form of change. So that's where I stand, is that I think a lot of the action that they say they might be taking is performative, as well as the words behind or the words behind how they engaged with us in policy processes as different individuals. It's very tokenistic as well. So while I think that some of them may wish to take action and in progressive ways, as an institution alone, South African government is not doing enough at all.
Thank you too. And then there's a follow-up question addressed at the other three of us, asking, what do you think, why are the leaders of the rich countries failing? Is it because climate change will be felt first and most by communities in the global south, and so they don't care, just as they don't care that they have exploited them for years? Who of you would like to go first? Greta, would you like to go? Is it okay?
I think there are many different reasons for that, and of course we can. Of course, one big reason is, of course, that these countries who are causing the most of the crisis, who are mostly responsible for this crisis, and who have emitted the most emissions historically, are the ones who are going to be hit the least and the latest, which is just another aspect of the climate crisis, which makes it so unfair. And right now, it's many developed countries are trying to make it seem like they are leaders, they are climate leaders, and that they are trying to lecture others on what to do, such as the country where I'm from. Sweden is internationally seen as a climate leader, and something that other countries should take inspiration from. If you take into account all the emissions and the holistic point of view, it's the exact opposite, and that's a narrative that really needs to change.
Dohyeon, do you have a thought on that question, why rich countries are failing, especially the rich and least affected countries?
Yes. personally, as a citizen living in the global south, I first think the developed nations failing to, to actually lead and to tackle the climate crisis is very shameful. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because we're not, it's rather a simple reason we're not experiencing climate crisis at a faster rate compared to other developing nations or those at the global south. But I think it is important for citizens of the global south and the governments to recognize that climate crisis in the end will affect all of us. And it's a matter of the speed. In the end, no one will be free from its impacts. So I think it is the most important thing to recognize that we're all in this crisis together, but right now, those in the global south will suffer the worst impact of climate crisis. So as part of the global north country, I feel like we need to push those governments to put justice and equity as part of climate action, not in just terms of climate finance, but also in terms of setting more ambitious NDCs that take into consideration the historical responsibilities and our economic capabilities. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would just add that I think by now the effects of the climate crisis are being normalized in the way that even rich countries, when they are hit and affected, the damage is being talked down. And so in Germany, we see that a lot. We had a huge climate disaster this summer. It took more than 180 people's lives, and that was just one flood. So and it was forgotten but it was the media and politics and so on. They stopped talking about it after just a couple of weeks after this tragedy happened. 20,000 people die each year in Germany because of the heat. So I wouldn't speak even of countries who are not affected. We know by now scientifically as well that every corner of the planet is affected. Yet the damages, the costs, and the lives are being normalized and mainstreamed and being portrayed as the price you have to pay for progress, so-called progress. And I think with that understanding of what progress is and of what development and so on is, you end up with an economy and a political culture that portrays climate damage, environmental and human costs as what is needed in order to progress. And that, of course, needs to be changed. So, of course, we talk also about a cultural change and shift here, a awakening when it comes to, what is the real value of who we are and how our economy and societies run. Just speaking, after the flood, there was another question in the comment section about the floods in Germany. You would think after such a flood hits a country, people change the perception about the climate crisis and politics change. And we saw that every single party was completely reluctant to change their plan to rise up to what is actually needed to stay below 1.5. So we see how much energy and creativity is being put and not changing their ways, even when the biggest crisis hit. So I think what we're seeing here again, there's no point in so-called relying on natural disasters to wake anyone up. It will be the people who will need to rise up. That's what we're doing. Gabriel, you have a hand. Try to say something.
Just a quick addendum to that. I think it's also quite telling when we look at the way that it's framed that the quote unquote developed nations are leading, when in fact it should be that they are looking to the most affected areas and countries and nations to lead the kind of climate justice mobilization. For we understand the first-hand impacts of the effects Of course, not to say that anyone else's effects and impacts are less than, because I feel that as though that starts opening an oppression Olympics that is oftentimes used to weaponize us against each other. But I think definitely looking at in this movement that we need to start framing it rather than what isn't the global North doing, but what should they be doing? And what they should be doing is looking to the global South and looking to the most affected areas, as we have for centuries, and familiarized and practiced indigenous knowledges and resilience building. Thank you.
Very important points. We have now we have some more questions in the chat, and I think we will come to them in a second. But then there is also questions from Frank Jordan from AP. So you may please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my questions. First one for you, Luisa. You said that none of the parties in Germany have strong enough policies on climate in their election programs. So what's your message for voters on Sunday? Is it pointless voting for any of them, including the Greens? And for the international activists on the call, there's a hunger strike by climate activists going on in Berlin right now, and they're demanding that the candidates in the German election meet with them by Thursday, or they'll stop drinking liquids as well. Do you condone such protests as a means of getting leaders to pay attention?
I would just quickly start with the party plans. We have so we are seeing, of course, discrepancies between the parties, and it would be pointless to talk them down. The discrepancies are big. But the point is that those parties who seem the most radical in terms of climate actions are still nowhere near what is needed when you look at our actual carbon budget. And so what we're saying is, yes, of course, go and look at the calculations done by the institutions, look at the math that is being done on the carbon budget at each of the programs, but this won't be enough for this election. We will need to be on the streets as well. And so, yeah, that's our broader message to the people. For the past 16 years, we had Chancellor Merkel in this country, and it almost feels like, there was this secret contract with her. You go voting once in 4 years, and then, you say goodbye, and in 4 years you check in again, and they let her do that, what she does, and you don't look too closely what is actually happening. And that doesn't work out. And we are now, as I said, in a point in history where emissions are rising higher than in the past 30 years. So it's great for everyone to go, but the real scandal of this election is that in the year 2021, in the midst of the escalating climate crisis, no single party dares to speak up about what needs to be done, actually, to speak up about the catastrophe that we're in, and to speak up about the changes necessary in order to do a fair share. And that needs to be on the table. And while parties are all deciding to not talk about those things, that's what we're bringing up. And that's also why we're rising. And of course, we know that after all, we will end up with a coalition that will in no possible way agree on a 1.5 degree pathway, since that is not proposed in any of the party programs. So that is what we will need to fight for that action that is not just convenient and nice, but that is needed. And people won't, of course, agree on what is needed if they don't know what crisis we are in. So we need to speak up about the urgency of this catastrophe, about the election as a human moment, given the longevity of this decision. And we will need to make sure that we do everything we can to wake everyone up around here. And maybe just to the question was addressed to everyone else regarding the hunger strike situation, but it's actually a bit different, the situation right now today. So the group has split. Yeah, but now over to you, Greta.
Yeah, so I would also just like to add that this is not a phenomenon unique to Germany. Of course, all around the world, the climate crisis cannot be solved through party politics alone. and we will have to go out on the streets and demand real change. But when we do that, real change can come, because democracy is not just on election day. Democracy is every day of every year, and we seem to forget that. We can't just vote for change. We also have to be active democratic citizens and go out on the streets and demand action.
Yes, and yeah, I think that's been very clear. Is there anyone who would like to say something about the second question? Okay, it doesn't seem like that, so if that's okay, I would just skip that for now. We have more questions upcoming from the Daily Maverick in South Africa. May I please have a comment from each of you on developed nations failing to meet their climate financial pledges to developing nations, and how this hinders sustainable development in those countries? Are you up for that? Okay, please go ahead. I will pass the mic to Gabriel, Greta, Vanessa, Dohyeon, and then to me. Once again, just to remind you, this is about developed nations failing to meet their climate financial pledges to developing countries.
Yeah, so I think that's something that's been in conversation very recently, especially among young people, as we try to navigate the space that is often gate-kept from us. We're told that things are one way when in fact they're the other. I think what I find quite upsetting is that, I think it was said earlier by the fellow people on the panel, that there is a responsibility that the global north or developed countries have to assist and support countries who are historically disadvantaged, shall I say. And I think one thing that I would say to that is that we need to see that action come forward. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our governments are able to make use of that climate finance. It makes no sense getting it and then having corruption envelop it. And I think that's something that we've seen in South Africa quite a lot, is that alongside money comes corruption. And I would hope that transparency would accompany this transaction, should it ever find its way to us. I'm not sure that it will at this rate, the way that things are looking, but I'm hopeful to see things come up. But I know that it's not on the top of the minds of the developed nations, so to speak, as if it was, we wouldn't be having the conversation right now.
Okay, Greta?
It's just so typical, and that's basically every single time that there's something concrete that we can do, we fail to do it, and we choose other things above that, since the climate is not our priority. Justice is not our priority. Equality is not our priority. Paying off historical debt is not our priority, because we only care about short-term egoistic things. So I just think that's it's quite a good summary of the current situation that we are in.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I want to start by pointing out that countries that are, facing the worst of the climate crisis, countries like mine, that have contributed so little to the climate crisis, and we are seeing the worst of these disasters. So the $100 billion climate finance target that was promised, to me, it was like the first step to correcting this injustice. It was like that moment where finally developed countries looked up and saw this suffering and the devastation that was going on in countries like mine because of the climate crisis. And this climate finance was promised, but the most disturbing thing about it is that it has not yet been delivered. So that is where the challenge really is. And like Greta has said, rich countries, they have a responsibility, they have a moral responsibility and obligation towards countries like mine that didn't cause the climate crisis, and yet they are facing the worst of the climate disasters.
Greta, do you want to add something to that? Yeah, you go ahead.
We talk about moral obligations, and that's of course at the very, very heart of this. But let's not also forget that if we are to be practical, and even if we ignore the justice aspect, the only right thing to do, if you look at the maths also, to distribute the carbon dioxide budget equally, this is not just the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do if we are to move forward to achieve the Paris Agreement. How can we expect other countries to start acting in line with it if, speaking from my point of view, how can countries like mine expect other countries to take climate action if we, who are very much more historically responsible per capita than other countries, if we ignore it, how can we expect them to do it? It just doesn't make sense. So if we want to stay in line with it, we say all the time that Sweden is such a small country, it doesn't matter what we do. But if we start to do it, it sends a signal. It's about solidarity. It's not, even if we look at the practical things, it's the only thing that will take us even the slightest bit forward.
Yeah. And Dohyeon, maybe you need to turn your camera off when you speak for the lag to not happen. That's okay.
Am I audible right now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I very much agree with Greta that financing the developing nations in the global south is not just important to help people in that country to cope with the impact of climate change, but also climate finance is what makes the Paris Agreement, what allows Paris Agreement to work on a global scale. So I think the COP26 this time is a perfect opportunity, and it is really the critical time for us to finance far beyond $100 billion per year to the global south as pledged in the Paris Agreement. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's become clear that two things people usually learn in kindergarten: you don't break your promises, and when you have a teamwork to do, everyone has to do their fair share. And nobody, you finish building houses because everyone does something and everyone does what they signed up to do, and that's what we have to do in terms of the Paris Agreement. But right now, all the rich countries stepping around saying, well, they're not doing anything as well, and using this as an excuse until forever is not just allowing the climate crisis to escalate even more, but also contributing to this escalation that we're seeing right now. And I think that's it's often portrayed, the fact that rich countries aren't paying their share is often portrayed as inaction, but it's actually not inaction that much. It is action. It's climate destruction action. It is something that it's causing even more costs. That's even causing more damages. That's causing more suffering. So every year and a year and a year that this money is not paid, what would need to be paid rises. And the damages, the suffering, the livelihoods taken are growing. So yeah, this is not a question of action or inaction. It's that kind of action you want to do, action towards a climate justice future or action towards a climate destruction future. And right now, countries, especially the richest ones in the world and the high emitting ones, are causing what path they are going. Hence, we are rising to move them away from that. Yes, so there are, I think, 3 final questions. Let's finish them quickly. We have one question for Greta from the Japanese newspaper sorry for this pronunciation. The question is, when you started the action in 2018, you were alone. Now Fridays for Future movement has become a global movement, as we can see here. Did you ever imagine it would be that big when you started? You said governments say they listen to young people's voice, but they obviously don't. But is there anything you think the movement is changing in the world? Yes.
I think when we say change, of course, there are many different ways that you can define that. Of course, we are nowhere near achieving the change that would be necessary to keep the global average temperature rise to well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But I mean, things are changing. People are slowly waking up. At least that's my experience. People are more and more sensing that something is seriously wrong. And we don't fully understand the implications of this crisis. But we know that something is wrong, and we know that governments and companies and state actors are not doing enough, far from it. And I think that's an easy proof of that is just to see how many people who have been organized and how many people who have been mobilized during the last few years in order to protest against the active inaction, maybe you should call it that. So I find that very hopeful. Of course, we still need to raise much more awareness. We still need to really start treating the crisis like a crisis. But the movement has changed things, even if they are not enough. Our goal is still to do as much as we possibly can, and that's exactly what we are doing.
Do you want to add something about whether you thought we would be such a big movement, or whether you could have imagined that when you started?
Well, obviously not. You can't foresee these kinds of things. If you could, they wouldn't happen. So obviously not. I just thought that something needs to be done, and I am someone and I can do something. That's why I started the school strike, and that's why so many other people all around the world also did that. And together we have accomplished this. We have now organized a movement consisting of millions of people all around the world. And of course, we could not have expected that when we first started striking.
Okay. If you have more questions, by the way, please put them in the chat. This would be your chance now. For the time being, we have one question from Ecuador. This goes, I think it's not directed at anyone. I will just read it out, and if you feel in charge, you may answer. The question is, natural disasters are connected according to a study recently by the University of the United Nations, and this international work that you've been doing. The question is, sorry, what is the connection that your collective has with the countries of America, Latin America, and the Amazon countries especially? So we today have no representative here from South American or the Americas in total, but I think it's clear that, of course, we are a global movement that consists of people in more than 100 countries in the world. So of course, we're working together and we're rising together. If that's the question, that maybe I misunderstood it, and Tali Centers, maybe you want to elaborate. You're still unmuted. Yes,
Hello.
now you can speak.
Yes, thank you. Yes, from Amazon countries, in Amazon countries, there are many troubles around the exploitation that petroleum in Amazon forests. So it is very important in this moment because the governments take the pandemic like excuse for to take politics about to relate in this line, no? So this is my questions, because it's really necessary. The young people represent works with collectives like yours about this subject.
We have a hand from Gabriel, so maybe Gabriel, you just want to go ahead.
Thank you. I hope it speaks to your point or to your question. But in essence, I just wanted to say something that really resonated when you were speaking now. One thing that we've been seeing globally, and I think everyone here can agree, which is quite horrendous, is the assassinations and the violence put onto activists. If you can even call us activists, because at the end of the day, we are all just fighting for a future. And if that makes us an activist, I'm sure, but it should be a human nature. But one thing that we're realizing now is that while we're moving forward, fighting these injustices, as you say, that has been happening, the world has been watching it silently. I think it's important that we continue to raise attention in these moments, as it began up with. I think Vanessa mentioned it, that during the pandemic, things went silent, but climate change was always looming behind us, just waiting for the moment to show its face again, or for us to notice that it had never left. And that people are just as much in danger, if not more than the environment. And so in this mobilization and in this collective actions that we continue moving forward with, that we ensure that we prioritize the protection and the livelihoods of individuals and of ecosystems as we move forward. It's crucial that we focus on the people in the front lines, that during this youth mobilization, that during collective actions that don't just fall in the month of September, but throughout the year, that we prioritize, attention and protection to these young people, as oftentimes we are left to see ourselves lost in the space. So my closing to that question would be, or to my closing would be, it's important that we don't forget each other as we rise up together. But then at the same time, understanding that, the coined words of a rising tide lifts all boats leaves the fact that not everyone has a boat to rise with. And so for us to make sure that they come with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words, Gabriel. I hope that answers the question. There is one question left in a there's now another question from Poland. So we will do two quick questions towards the end. We're approaching the hour, or we've just passed the hour. So very quickly, one question about the German election, whether I think it will be a decisive issue for the German voters next Sunday, and what has changed since the election in 2017. Well, I don't think this is up to what I think we see, and the surveys and studies show this very clearly, that there is an unprecedented awareness amongst the German public that it's no election before so much or so often was people spoke about the climate crisis. And of course, we're also seeing that recent studies have shown that more youth, or incredible number of youth, almost 50% are, I think more than 50% are very, very concerned with the climate crisis and their future. More than 70% of youth across even, countries across the globe feel betrayed by their government. So we do see, of course, the level of awareness is changing. And we also see in Germany in particular that when people are being asked, the most important issue for them, like before this election, is indeed the climate emergency. Yet when it comes to, what are we talking about? I would say that we talk maybe about some climate change happening. we are not talking of a climate crisis in Germany. And when there is no political party, no political leader who speaks about it as it was a climate crisis, how could people ever acknowledge it as a climate crisis that it is, and conclude the urgency and the required action from what has been said and what we are seeing from leaders. So I think we need to be careful here, because just some awareness about a changing climate doesn't reflect what is happening in the real world. And that's, of course, one reason that brings us on the streets, to bring reality into this discourse, to bring reality into this election campaign, to bring reality that is being denied by politics and large parts of the media, into this societal discourse. Yes, and in the debates that are being happening about this change is necessary. And right now we're not seeing that the climate crisis is being handled as an emergency. And only once you consider it as an emergency, you're able to conclude what is needed and address this as what it is. Yes. Okay, so I think given that we have spent so much time now, I hope it's okay that we will skip the last question, if that's okay. I would like to thank you, everyone who has been on this panel, for joining us today. Thank you everyone who visited. Gabriel, if that's okay, if there's any more important points you would like to make that hasn't been raised.
Just 5 seconds. To the point of the question of, do you think stopping global warming at 1.9 degrees, I genuinely think that we need to start realizing that, and I think it's a collective realization that 1.5 for the rest of the world is 2 or more degrees in Africa. The impacts that hit you at 1.9 will be life-altering to a point where life would not be worth it. And not to leave you on such a sour note, but I definitely think that to reach 1.5 and think we can go forward on top of it, because we think that 1.9 might be viable, is inaccurate. And I think truly we need to realize that our effects in most affected areas are way more impactful to the lives of the first frontliners. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for making this important point. I think it very much also highlights the aspect of equity and global justice that we are looking at when it comes to the upcoming climate strike and what we are striking for. So at this point, I would like to close this panel, if that's okay with the panelists. Thank you so much to everyone from media and press stations across the world for joining us today. And we hope you cover the strikes on Friday. If you have any upcoming and follow-up questions, you have the addresses and contact details of the ones organizing this press conference, of Daniel and Connor, etc. So of course, feel free to always reach out to them for any follow-ups. Yes, I think that's it for today. And yes, see you soon somehow. And thanks for taking the time today.